The city was alive, pulsing with energy as its streets hummed with the constant motion of cars and pedestrians. The buildings stood tall, modern, and proud, casting long shadows over the busy avenues. Among the many high-end businesses that lined the district was Gallagher & Company. Luxury dealership, a prestigious car showroom known for its sleek cars and exclusive clientele. It was the kind of place where only the rich and powerful walked through the doors. A kingdom for those with wealth and status to flaunt. Marcus Bennett, however, was not the kind of man to flaunt. Dressed in a modest, well-tailored suit, he entered the showroom with a quiet purpose. His appearance was polished but understated, his brown eyes calm, his hair neatly combed, his posture straight and confident. To most people, he was simply another businessman walking through the doors of a high-end dealership. But to the employees of Gallagher & Company, Marcus was about to become an enigma. Inside the dealership, the atmosphere was nothing short of luxurious. The air smelled faintly of new leather and polished chrome, and the hum of high-performance engines resonated through the showroom. Glass walls showcased a selection of the latest luxury cars, sleek, powerful machines that gleamed under the lights. The salespeople, dressed in sharp suits, attended to a steady stream of well-dressed customers, their attention shifting from one person to the next with practiced ease. Marcus, though, remained unnoticed as he wandered through the aisles of polished vehicles. He admired the cars with quiet interest, running his fingers lightly over the gleaming surfaces. A part of him had dreamed of owning such a machine for years. But he had always opted for practicality over extravagance. Today, though, he had decided it was time. He had worked hard, built his fortune from the ground up. And today, he was prepared to reward himself. The limited edition sports car that had been advertised for months was now his goal. But as the minutes passed, his hopes of receiving assistance began to fade. Salespeople, too preoccupied with the wealthier-looking clients, passed by him without so much as a glance. Some of them even exchanged knowing glances, clearly judging him based on his appearance. To them, he was just another man, nothing more than a potential window shopper. They didn't know the reality of Marcus's life, nor did they care to. As time wore on, Marcus grew more and more aware of the dismissive glances. The staff seemed to be taking extra care to avoid him. One young salesperson, a man with perfectly styled hair and a smug smile, made brief eye contact with him before looking away and immediately turning to a couple in designer clothes. Marcus paused near the sports car he had come to see. He stood still for a moment, hoping someone would approach him, but no one did. He waited for 20 minutes, long enough to feel the sting of being ignored. The whispers of the staff grew louder, and his frustration began to simmer beneath the surface. "I'm wasting my time here," one of the salespeople muttered to a colleague, loud enough for Marcus to hear. "Another one of those guys who's just here for a look, not a buy. He won't afford the car." It was then that Marcus realized the truth. He was being judged, not based on who he was, but on what others assumed him to be. To them, his skin color, his simple clothes, and his calm demeanor marked him as someone who didn't belong in their world of luxury. He wasn't one of the elite. He wasn't worthy of their attention. The sting of their judgment hit Marcus like a cold slap to the face. But instead of confronting them immediately, he took a deep breath, his calm exterior masking the anger that bubbled inside. His father had taught him to never let his emotions get the best of him, to always keep his composure and rise above ignorance. He approached the counter where a middle-aged man with glasses was leaning against the desk, chatting with a fellow employee. "Excuse me," Marcus said politely, his voice steady but firm. "I'm interested in purchasing one of your vehicles. Could someone assist me?" The man behind the counter barely looked up. "We're a little busy right now," he said dismissively, not even bothering to make eye contact. "Why don't you wait a moment?" Marcus stood still for a second, his patience wearing thin. He nodded quietly, then turned and walked out of the dealership without another word. As he exited, he overheard one of the salespeople laugh, muttering to a colleague, "Another one of those guys just wasting our time." His heart raced as he left the showroom. The hurt and anger were palpable, but he didn't let it show. Instead, he made a decision. As he drove away in his aging sedan, he thought about the years of hard work and sacrifice that had brought him to this moment. He had worked for every penny he had, but the staff at Gallagher & Company didn't see that. They only saw a man who didn't fit their idea of who should be able to afford their luxury cars. This wasn't just about the car. It wasn't just about the money. It was about respect. And Marcus Bennett wasn't the type to let his dignity be trampled on. As Marcus drove home that evening, the anger that had initially simmered inside him began to fade into something more resolute. He had always prided himself on being patient, composed, and measured in his actions. But the events of that afternoon had cut deeper than any business negotiation or financial setback ever had. It wasn't just about being overlooked, it was about the arrogance, the assumptions, the prejudice that ran so deeply in the hearts of the people at Gallagher and Company. He could still hear the salesman's dismissive words in his head. Another one of those guys wasting our time. It wasn't just the insult, it was the feeling that he wasn't seen. That his years of hard work, his quiet success, meant nothing. All of it, his upbringing, his sacrifices, the path he had forged on his own, meant nothing to those people because they had judged him for something as trivial as how he looked. By the time Marcus arrived at his penthouse apartment, the city's skyline spread out before him like a sprawling sea of lights. He walked over to the large windows, looking out over the city that had been both a battleground and a sanctuary for him. He had come so far, fought so hard, but today, it felt like all his progress had been erased by the arrogance of a few people who saw him as nothing more than an outsider. He had no intention of letting this moment pass by as just another bad experience. No, this would be the turning point. That night, as he sat at his desk, his laptop open in front of him, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He'd heard rumors about the ownership of Gallagher and Company over the years. And with a few calls and a little research, he quickly confirmed that the dealership was on the market. It had been struggling for some time, despite its outward appearance of success, and the owner was now eager to sell. It was the perfect opportunity. With a quiet smile, Marcus began to make calls to the few business contacts he trusted the most. He didn't need to explain the details to them, his reputation preceded him. Within hours, he had enough financial leverage to make an offer on the entire dealership. The deal was made swiftly, and the paperwork was signed before the night was over. The next morning, the city was waking up to the usual chaos of honking horns and busy streets. But for Marcus, today was the day he would take control. He put on a tailored black suit, his favorite pair of polished shoes, and walked out of his apartment with a sense of quiet determination. He wasn't just going to buy a car today, he was going to own the place that had humiliated him. And he would make sure no one else would ever have to experience what he had. By the time he reached Gallagher and Company, the staff was already bustling around, getting ready for the day's customers. No one noticed Marcus as he walked through the glass doors. The showroom was as pristine and shiny as it had been the day before. The salespeople stood behind their desks, casually chatting amongst themselves, ignoring the few customers who were looking at the cars. But this time, Marcus wasn't here as a customer. He walked straight to the counter, where Philip Carter, the middle-aged general manager, was talking to a younger salesman. The conversation stopped abruptly when Marcus approached them. "Good morning, sir," Philip said, smiling with the kind of practiced politeness that he'd learned over the years. "How can I help you today?" Marcus didn't return the smile. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a set of documents. He placed them on the desk in front of Philip, who glanced at the papers before looking up at Marcus with confusion in his eyes. "I'm not here to buy a car," Marcus said in a calm, measured tone. "I'm here as your new boss." Philip's face drained of color. His eyes flickered nervously from the papers to Marcus's face. What do you mean?" he stammered. But the look of confusion was quickly replaced with realization. The documents Marcus had placed on the desk were the official papers transferring ownership of the dealership. Marcus had purchased Gallagher and Company overnight. I don't understand," Philip said, his voice faltering. You bought the dealership?" Marcus nodded. "That's right." A ripple of shock went through the showroom. Employees began to murmur quietly as they noticed the exchange. The young salesman who had ignored Marcus the day before looked up in surprise, his mouth hanging open. "I came in yesterday to buy a car," Marcus continued, his voice steady. "And this is how I was treated. Ignored, dismissed, judged, all because of how I look. You assumed I couldn't afford anything here, simply because I didn't fit the mold of your typical customer. But now, You'll see just how wrong you were." Philip looked around at the growing crowd of staff, some of whom had overheard the conversation and were now watching with wide eyes. Marcus took a step forward, his presence commanding the room. Effective immediately, Marcus said, "I am the owner of Gallagher & Company, and things are going to change around here. No longer will customers be treated this way. Not a single one of you will disrespect a customer based on how they look, or assume they don't belong. From now on, every customer will be treated with the utmost respect, no matter their appearance, background, or wealth." Philip stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing but unable to speak. Marcus's gaze turned to the rest of the staff. "Those of you who have treated people with respect, those of you who have shown kindness, will be rewarded," Marcus said. "The rest of you, who think you are above others, are no longer welcome here." One by one, Marcus called out the names of the employees who had ignored him the day before, their faces turning pale as they realized what was happening. As he fired them, he could see the shock in their eyes, the disbelief that the man they had so carelessly dismissed was now the one in control. By the end of the day, the dealership was unrecognizable. The staff who had remained were those who understood the value of respect and equality. The toxic atmosphere had evaporated, replaced with a new energy, a sense of fairness and dignity. Marcus Bennett had not only purchased the dealership, he had taken back his dignity and made sure that everyone who walked through those doors would be treated with the respect they deserved. As Marcus left the dealership that afternoon, he felt a quiet satisfaction. He didn't need to flaunt his wealth, nor did he need to make anyone feel small. His actions spoke louder than any words could. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus knew that the road ahead would be different, for both him and the dealership. It was just the beginning. The days following Marcus's takeover of Gallagher & Company were a whirlwind of change. The once luxurious but dysfunctional dealership quickly transformed under his leadership. Word spread like wildfire throughout the city. Gallagher & Company was no longer the place where customers were judged by their appearance. The new owner was someone who believed in fairness, dignity, and respect for everyone, no matter their background. For the first time in years, the dealership felt like a place where people genuinely wanted to work. Not just a job to make money. The salespeople, who had been so eager to look down on others, now found themselves having to prove themselves in a different way, by offering exceptional service to every customer. Regardless of how they dressed or looked, they were no longer rewarded for arrogance or status but for showing humility and professionalism. As the days turned into weeks, the staff adjusted to the new culture. The old, toxic energy slowly disappeared, replaced with a sense of teamwork and respect. Even the employees who had been fired, those who had treated Marcus so poorly, felt the weight of their actions. Many of them had to face the consequences of their behavior and find new jobs. Though some would later admit, in hindsight, that the experience had changed their perspective. Marcus, however, didn't relish in the downfall of those he had dismissed. He had made his point, not through cruelty, but through action. He had shown them the importance of not making assumptions based on superficial things like wealth, appearance, or race. It was a lesson they would carry with them for the rest of their lives, whether they wanted to or not. As Gallagher & Company began to thrive, so did Marcus's reputation. People started talking about the humble man who had turned a place of arrogance and judgment into a model of respect and customer care. In business circles, Marcus became a name that demanded respect, not because of his wealth, but because of his principles. He had spent years building a successful business empire, but it was his actions in taking over the dealership that solidified his status as a man who believed in fairness above all else. Yet, as the dealership flourished, Marcus realized that the fight was far from over. He had conquered one battle, but there were still people who resented his rise. His actions hadn't gone unnoticed, especially by those who thrived on discrimination and status. He had taken down a system that allowed people to be judged by their appearance. And in doing so, he had shaken the foundations of an entire culture. There were whispers in the city about Marcus's actions, some in support, others in anger. A few influential figures in the automotive world, who had long supported the elitism Marcus had toppled, began to distance themselves from him. Business deals that had once been easily arranged now became more complicated. Some viewed him as a threat, a disruptor of the old way of doing things, while others admired his resolve. Marcus knew that these challenges were part of the price he had to pay for doing what he believed was right. But it didn't bother him. He had faced adversity before. What he didn't expect, however, was the pressure that came from people he considered allies. There were whispers from investors who questioned whether he had gone too far, whether his actions had cost him valuable connections. It was a subtle but growing tension that Marcus couldn't ignore. One evening, while working late in his office at the dealership, Marcus received a call from an old friend, David Lawrence. David was a prominent figure in the business world, a man who had helped Marcus during his early years of investment. He had always been a mentor and a guiding voice in Marcus's career. "Marcus," David said, his voice calm but serious, "I've been hearing things. People are talking about what you did with the dealership. And I need to be honest with you, some of them are worried. The way you've shaken things up, it's making some powerful people nervous." Marcus sat back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. "I'm not surprised. Some people prefer the old ways, when power and wealth were the ultimate measures of success. But I've made it clear that respect and kindness should be the true measure." "I understand that, and I admire your stance," David said, "but there's a bigger game at play here. You've upset more than just the dealership. People are watching you, and not all of them are as supportive as you might think. There are others who have the power to make your life very difficult if they feel threatened." Marcus took a deep breath, his mind already racing. He had expected some resistance, but he hadn't anticipated this level of backlash. Still, he was undeterred. He had always believed in doing what was right, even when the odds were stacked against him. "David, I didn't do this for the approval of others," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "I did it because I believe that things need to change. If people don't like it, that's their problem, not mine." David paused for a moment before responding. "I understand, Marcus, but I just want you to be prepared. This won't be easy. Sometimes doing the right thing can be the hardest thing." Marcus nodded, his resolve only strengthening. "I've faced harder battles before, David. This is no different." Weeks passed, and the pressure mounted. Marcus's decisions were beginning to have ripple effects, not just within the dealership, but in the wider world of business. There were meetings where he found himself alone, where old contacts hesitated to shake his hand. A few influential figures began pulling away from him, no longer willing to engage with the man who had upended the status quo. But then, something unexpected happened. Customers, real customers, people who had once been overlooked by the arrogant sales staff, began pouring into the dealership. They had heard of the transformation at Gallagher & Company and wanted to experience it for themselves. They appreciated the humility and respect that had replaced the old elitism, and they trusted that they would be treated fairly. Business boomed. The dealership, once known for its exclusivity, became a place where anyone, regardless of their wealth or background, could come and feel respected. It wasn't just about the cars anymore. It was about the experience, the atmosphere, the way customers were treated with kindness and professionalism. Marcus's gamble was paying off. The people who had been skeptical of him were now being proven wrong. The dealership had become a beacon of change, a model for how businesses could operate with integrity. And Marcus Bennett, the quiet businessman who had been dismissed and judged for too long, had turned the tables. The message he had sent was clear. Respect cannot be bought or measured by wealth. It must be earned by actions. Months later, as Marcus stood in the dealership's new lounge, looking out over the bustling showroom, he couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. The journey had been long and filled with obstacles, but the dealership was thriving. More importantly, the culture of respect he had instilled was deeply ingrained in the company's DNA. He had proven that doing the right thing was the only way forward. And in doing so, he had built not just a successful business, but a legacy that would last. As he walked through the showroom, he smiled at the staff who now treated each customer with respect, no matter who they were. Marcus knew that this wasn't just about a dealership anymore. It was about creating a new standard for how people treated one another. And in the end, that was worth more than any luxury car. Marcus stood at the front of the dealership, watching the steady stream of customers who walked through the door, greeted with warmth and respect by his employees. It was a sight he'd longed for, a sight he'd worked tirelessly to create. The sleek cars, once symbols of elitism and exclusivity, now felt like they belonged to everyone, no longer just the wealthy elite. but to anyone who valued quality and integrity. But the transformation of Gallagher and Company was not just felt by the customers who walked through the doors. It was starting to make waves throughout the city's business community. The impact of his decisions was beginning to reach further than he had anticipated. One crisp morning, as Marcus reviewed reports in his office, a knock on the door interrupted his focus. He looked up to find his assistant, Claire, standing in the doorway with an envelope in her hand. "Mr. Bennett, you have a visitor. He says it's urgent." Marcus raised an eyebrow, slightly puzzled. "Who is it?" "Mr. Thomas Reynolds," Claire replied. "He's from Reynolds Automobiles. He wants to talk about the dealership." The name caught Marcus off guard. Thomas Reynolds was a well-known figure in the automotive industry, a man who was part of the old guard. Someone who had thrived in the world of high-end exclusivity, and who had always adhered to the unspoken rule that wealth and status dictated the worth of a person. He was not the kind of person Marcus usually associated with. The thought of meeting him piqued Marcus's curiosity. "Send him in," Marcus said. Moments later, a tall, distinguished man in his late 50s entered the room. His salt and pepper hair and sharp suit gave him an air of authority. But there was something in his eyes, an intensity, that suggested he wasn't here just for a casual visit. "Mr. Bennett," Reynolds said, extending his hand with a firm grip. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Marcus stood up, shaking the older man's hand with a polite smile. "Mr. Reynolds, to what do I owe the pleasure?" Reynolds didn't beat around the bush. "I've heard a lot about Gallagher and Company in the past few weeks. I've been following your progress closely, and I have to admit, I'm impressed, but also intrigued." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Intrigued?" Reynolds nodded, leaning back slightly in his chair. "You've done something that very few have ever attempted. Transformed a dealership from a place that treated people like commodities into one that values respect above all else. You've disrupted the entire industry. Marcus, you've changed the game." "I didn't set out to change the game, Mr. Reynolds," Marcus replied. "I simply believe that businesses should treat people as they deserve to be treated, regardless of their appearance or status." Reynolds smirked, the edge of a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Oh, I know. That's why I'm here." He paused, eyeing Marcus carefully. "You've proven that a business doesn't need to cater only to the elite to be successful. You've shattered the idea that you have to look a certain way or come from a certain background to be valuable." Marcus remained silent, watching the man intently. He could sense that there was more to this conversation than the flattery Reynolds was offering. "I've also been hearing that your sales have skyrocketed since you took over," Reynolds continued. "More customers, more respect, more business. It's quite impressive, but also quite dangerous." Marcus leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "Dangerous?" Reynolds nodded slowly. "There are many people who are not so happy with your success. Marcus, you've shaken things up, made it clear that the old ways are no longer acceptable. And there are people who don't like that kind of disruption. People who hold a lot of power." The words hung in the air for a moment. Marcus's mind raced. He had known that his actions would have consequences, but hearing it from someone like Reynolds made it feel much more real. "What are you suggesting?" Marcus asked, his voice steady but with a hint of caution. Reynolds sighed, placing his hands on the desk. "I'm not here to threaten you, Marcus. Quite the opposite. Actually, I came here to offer you something." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "I want to partner with you," Reynolds said, "not just in business, but in changing the way the entire industry operates. You've proven that there's a demand for respect, for equality, for fair treatment, but there are powerful forces, companies, brands, that are still stuck in the old ways. I believe together, we can do more than just change Gallagher and Company. We can change the entire automotive industry." Marcus sat back, processing the offer. On the surface, it sounded like a brilliant opportunity, an alliance with one of the most established names in the industry. But there was something about Reynolds that made him cautious. The man had always been a part of the establishment that Marcus had sought to disrupt. What was his true motivation? "I'm not interested in doing business with people who don't share my values," Marcus said carefully. "If you think I'll compromise what I've worked for just for a bigger profit, you're mistaken." Reynolds chuckled softly. "I'm not asking you to compromise, Marcus. I'm asking you to lead. To take what you've done with Gallagher and Company and use it to change the industry. We can work together, find common ground, and create a movement that shifts the focus from status and wealth to respect and fairness. I've got the resources and the influence. You've got the vision and the courage. There was a long pause. Marcus thought about it for a moment. He had already changed one company. Could he really change an entire industry? He leaned forward, his eyes locking with Reynolds's. I'm listening. Reynolds smiled, sensing victory. I knew you'd see the potential. The offer that Reynolds had laid on the table was undeniably tempting. The possibility of partnering with one of the most influential figures in the automotive industry could catapult Marcus's vision to new heights. Together, they could reshape the way businesses treated customers, not just in the automotive world but beyond. But Marcus knew the stakes were high. He'd spent years building his reputation on principles of respect, humility, and fairness, aligning himself with someone like Reynolds, a man who had been part of the very system Marcus had set out to dismantle. Was a risk. Could he trust Reynolds to uphold the values he had fought so hard for? Or would the partnership end up compromising everything he stood for? It was a question that would weigh on Marcus for the days to come. The choices he made now would determine not just his future, but the future of Gallagher & Company, and possibly the entire industry. The days following Reynolds's proposal were some of the most challenging in Marcus's career. His mind was consumed by the decision, torn between the opportunity to expand his vision and the fear of compromising the very principles he had fought to uphold. As much as the idea of transforming the entire automotive industry intrigued him, Marcus knew the stakes were high. Partnering with someone like Thomas Reynolds was not without its risks. Reynolds had spent his career in the heart of the old system, the world of privilege, exclusivity, and status. Could he really be trusted to help lead the way toward a more inclusive and respectful business model? For the first time in years, Marcus found himself unsure of his next move. The safety of his current position at Gallagher & Company was undeniable. The dealership had been a resounding success, and his message of equality had resonated with customers and employees alike. But was it enough? Could he be content with just one successful business? Or did he have the responsibility to push further? To challenge an entire industry that was still entrenched in outdated ways? Late one evening, as the sun set behind the city skyline, Marcus found himself standing in front of the dealership, watching the last few customers leave. The showroom was quiet now, the bustle of the day having faded into a calm stillness. He was alone, but not really. The weight of the decision hung heavy in the air around him, an invisible presence that gnawed at his thoughts. A tap on his shoulder broke the silence. He turned to find Claire standing behind him, her expression serious. I can tell you've been thinking about this for a while now, she said, her voice soft but knowing. You haven't been yourself lately. Marcus gave a small sigh. I haven't been able to stop thinking about Reynolds's offer. Claire nodded. I can see why. It's a big deal, Marcus, but you've always told me that you wanted to change things. Not just for Gallagher & Company, but for the entire industry. This could be your chance to make an even bigger impact. Marcus looked out at the empty showroom, his thoughts swirling. But what if Reynolds doesn't actually care about changing things? What if this is just another way to solidify the power of the elite? Just with a different face? Claire stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. You've built something real here. Gallagher & Company didn't just succeed because you were lucky. It succeeded because you stuck to your values. And if you decide to partner with Reynolds, it won't be because you need him. It'll be because you can use his resources to do even more good. You've already proven that you can lead with integrity. If anyone can guide him toward doing the right thing, it's you. Marcus turned to face her, taking a deep breath. What if I fail? What if I can't change the system from within? What if, in trying to do the right thing, I lose everything? Claire's eyes softened with understanding. Failure is always a risk, Marcus, but so is standing still. You've already taken the hard road, the road that others were too afraid to walk. This is just the next step. If you really believe in what you're doing, if you truly believe that respect and fairness should be the foundation of every business, then don't be afraid to take that leap. No matter what happens, you'll know you tried to make a difference. The silence between them was heavy, but in it, Marcus found clarity. The fear of failure was real, but the fear of not trying, of standing on the sidelines while the world continued to be shaped by the same old biases, was far worse. The next morning, Marcus picked up the phone. It was time to make a decision. When Marcus called Thomas Reynolds the following day, He felt a sense of finality. His decision had been made. And now, it was time to face the consequences. Mr. Reynolds, Marcus said firmly, I've thought long and hard about your proposal. I appreciate your offer, but before we move forward, I need to make one thing clear. Reynolds's voice crackled through the line. Eager. Of course, Marcus, I'm all ears. I'm not going to compromise my values. Marcus replied, I'm not here to just make money or expand at any cost. If we're going to work together, it has to be on the foundation of respect, fairness, and inclusion. We'll treat every customer equally, regardless of their background, and we'll ensure that no one is ever judged based on how they look, what they wear, or how much money they have. There was a pause on the other end. Marcus could hear Reynolds's breath, but the man didn't respond immediately. Finally, he spoke, his tone somewhat measured. You're asking for a lot. Marcus, this isn't just about the cars. It's about reshaping an entire industry. Are you really ready to take on that responsibility? I'm not doing it alone. Marcus answered, his voice unwavering, but I will do it. If you're willing to help, I'll work with you. If not, then we walk away. Reynolds exhaled slowly. For a moment, Marcus thought the conversation would end there. But then, Reynolds spoke with newfound resolve. All right, Marcus, he said, you've got my word. We'll do this your way. Let's change the industry. A sense of relief washed over Marcus. He knew that this partnership would come with its challenges. But for the first time, he felt like he was walking into something that could truly make a difference, not just for him, but for everyone who had been overlooked or judged. Marcus's partnership with Reynolds marked the beginning of a new chapter. Together, they launched a nationwide campaign aimed at transforming the automotive industry's approach to customers. The campaign focused on celebrating diversity and promoting inclusivity, not just in the customer base but within the workforce itself. They began offering training programs for salespeople to ensure that every employee was equipped with the tools to treat every customer with respect, regardless of their appearance or status. The response was overwhelming. Customers flocked to Gallagher & Company, not just for the cars but for the experience, an experience rooted in dignity and respect. The dealership became a symbol of change in a world that had long been defined by exclusivity and privilege. As Marcus stood in the showroom, now busier than ever, he realized that the true victory wasn't in the sales numbers or the media coverage. The true victory was in the transformation that had taken place, not just within Gallagher & Company, but within the entire industry. He had proven that change was possible, that businesses could thrive by valuing people for who they were, not what they had. Looking around at the employees who now shared his vision, Marcus smiled. This was only the beginning. Together, they had built something that would endure, a legacy of respect, fairness, and integrity. And in the end, that was worth more than any car. Years passed, and Gallagher & Company continued to thrive under Marcus's leadership. The dealership, once a place of exclusion and judgment, had become a beacon of change in the automotive industry. The campaign that Marcus and Reynolds had launched had far surpassed anyone's expectations, becoming a model for businesses across various sectors. Respect and fairness were no longer seen as optional, they were the standard. Marcus's decision to partner with Reynolds had proven to be the right one. Together, they had created an empire built not on status or privilege, but on the simple, profound belief that every individual deserved to be treated with dignity. The automotive world had begun to change. Slowly but surely, the ripple effect of Marcus's actions had spread to other industries, inspiring leaders to think differently about how they ran their businesses. And yet, as much as things had changed, Marcus knew the battle was never really over. The world was constantly evolving, and there would always be challenges to face. But as he walked through the showroom, looking at the diverse group of customers and employees, he realized something. Change was happening. And it was happening because of people who cared enough to act. One afternoon, as Marcus sat in his office, flipping through reports and meeting with his team, Claire entered with a small, carefully folded envelope. She placed it on his desk, and Marcus looked up in surprise. "A letter?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "It's addressed to you," Claire said with a knowing smile. "It was left with the front desk. It seems important." Marcus opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. As he read the words, his heart swelled with a quiet pride. "Dear Mr. Bennett, I hope this letter finds you well. My name is Ahmed Nasir, and I'm writing to thank you. 2 years ago, I walked into Gallagher and Company, looking to purchase a car. I wasn't dressed in the latest fashion, nor did I drive the newest luxury car to your dealership. I had heard about your transformation, and I came in hoping I would be treated with respect. At the time, I was going through a tough period. I was rebuilding my life after losing my business, struggling to make ends meet, and unsure of my future. But when I entered your dealership, I was greeted with kindness. I was treated like a valued customer, not based on what I had in my bank account or how I looked, but because you and your team believe in the inherent worth of every person. That day changed my life. Not only did I leave with the car I dreamed of, but more importantly, I left with something far more valuable, a sense of hope. Your commitment to fairness and dignity inspired me to rebuild my business and my life. Today, I'm proud to say I've opened my own company, and I'm doing better than I ever thought possible. I wanted to personally thank you for what you've done, not just for me, but for everyone you've touched. You've made a difference in more ways than you know. With deep gratitude, Ahmed Nasir. Marcus set the letter down, his mind racing. It was a simple thank you note, but it spoke volumes. It reminded him of why he had chosen this path in the first place, to create a world where people didn't have to fight for respect, where their worth wasn't determined by the superficial standards of the old world. Claire, noticing the emotion in Marcus's eyes, smiled. It seems like your impact has reached even further than you imagined. Marcus nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the letter. This is why we do it, Claire. This is why it matters. The business we've built here isn't just about cars or profits, it's about changing lives. He paused for a moment, his mind going back to the countless hours of work, the risks he had taken, the difficult decisions, and the people who had doubted him. But every step of the journey had led to this moment, proof that what he had set out to do was more than just possible. It was necessary. As Gallagher and Company continued to flourish, Marcus's influence spread even further. Over time, more businesses across various industries adopted the principles he had championed, treating every customer with respect, valuing integrity over status, and building companies that were grounded in fairness. Though Marcus had started with a simple goal, changing the way one dealership operated, he had unknowingly sparked a movement that reverberated across the globe. His name became synonymous with justice, fairness, and the power of individual action. He was invited to speak at conferences, share his story in interviews, and mentor young entrepreneurs who wanted to follow in his footsteps. But Marcus never lost sight of what mattered most: the people. The employees who had stood by him from the start, the customers whose lives had been touched by the changes at Gallagher and Company, and the thousands of individuals who were now living better lives because they had been treated with respect. In the end, Marcus Bennett's legacy wasn't just in the wealth he had accumulated or the success of his businesses. It was in the hearts of the people he had inspired, the communities he had uplifted, and the world he had helped reshape. A world where no one would ever be judged for how they looked, but for who they were.